Great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which time zone you're joining us from. On behalf of the PWA team at Microsoft Edge, I'm thrilled to be here and to be able to discuss with you about the manifest file and how we can enhance it to make web apps more store-friendly. I'd like to start first by introducing myself. I am Diego Gonzalez. I am a program manager in Microsoft Edge, and also will introduce my backup speaker and the person that's pretty much been actively involved with the effort surrounding the web application manifest files and PWAs in general, Aaron Gustafsson. The format that we will be having for this short session is have a short presentation and then try to foster some discussion and feedback from you attendees on what you would like to see and what you think is required on the manifest file side of things. So let's get down to the topic at hand. We have two different concepts that are very important here. First is we're going to be treating a relationship between a web app and a distribution mechanism. In this case, we're going to be targeting and referring to the manifest file because it is the place where we can find associated metadata of the web app. And we're going to be talking as well about the App Store because it's not only a known mechanism for acquiring apps, it's also one of the strongest paradigms that we have nowadays for application discovery. And this is a very desirable characteristics that more and more developers ask for when it comes to PWAs. So we're going to start focusing on the concept of the store. And I want here to pretty much just take a look at what a storefront looks like. But furthermore, I want to take a look at how it is composed because it's definitely more complex than what one really generally realizes. And I actually realized when I was putting together this presentation the amount of information and the density of fields that you would get in an interface that you are used to seeing on a daily basis that actually seems very, very simple. But let's take a look. We have first something like the name. We have a description. More and more, you're starting to see that there's this concept of a featured image or a featured video in the application's pages, in the application's install pages, download pages that make the experience a lot more engaging and kind of a lot more appealing. There's, of course, the iconography and the branding of the application. Important here, the concept of a rating, age rating or some related type of rating that allows you to know if the application is suited for certain audiences. If we keep on scrolling down, we can see that there's the concept of availability. And here, I personally do not think it's really relevant considering that we should have progressive enhancement. But the whole idea here is to kind of put out there, and I would actually love to hear about use cases where you as developers would think this type of information can be useful. Maybe there are some use cases that we're not taking into account, and it would be great to know about them. There is here the long description, which is pretty much the same description that we saw beforehand, but just displayed in a different way. If we keep on scrolling even further down, then we have the kind of like something that's called people also like, which could be applications that are in a similar category to the one that you're browsing, or applications that might be kind of related in some way to the application that you're exploring at the moment. Of course, screenshots, which would represent a common use case scenario of the app, and it kind of allows the user to see the application, how it looks like even before downloading it and installing it. If we keep on scrolling down in an experience like this one, we can see that it starts getting even more dense because we have first a what's new in this version, and we can have links and information that would go to release notes or change logs or version logs. And this general idea of more additional information, which we can break down into publisher. We want to know who is the publisher and who is the developer. It can be useful as well to have some publisher information, basically the website of the publisher, or where can I get support if I'm having any sort of trouble with the application at hand. Also, it's being more and more common, especially with the focus on privacy, that users want to know what are the permissions that an application will have once they download it and once they install it. Supported languages for the application, and category as a whole. So you can see that there's a lot of information that's condensed in this area, and we want to see how this information would be mapped to, let's say, a manifest file. If we keep on going, let's say, to another category of the store, we can see system requirements. And here again, I don't think it's really relevant because we have kind of like the upper hand when it comes to web applications regarding reach and cross-platform support. But again, I'm happy to hear comments or ideas on the matter if this is something that you would find useful. And of course, we have then the reviews, which are actually a very important part of every storefront, because they give the user, first of all, a quantitative rating, and this could be seen as an overall measure of how the application is, and many users will actually take a look at the reviews that the application has before deciding to install it or not. And of course, it also gives the users the possibility to read some qualitative reviews, which can provide some in-depth description that might sway them into installing the application or not. Now, these in general are kind of like a type of experience and type of information that is very typical across many different storefronts. It's also information that is very important for users because they use this information to take decisions on whether they will end up installing and acquiring the application or not. So being able to provide this information is key to leveling up the playing field between the web apps and the native counterparts, especially when we are talking about store distribution. So if we take a look now at the manifest file, this is the current definition of the manifest dictionary as it stands today in the editor's draft. We can see that if we take a closer look, there are many fields that can be useful for recreating a storefront-like experience like the one that we've just seen. So we have name, we have already the description, we have icons, we have screenshots, categories, the International Age Rating Coalition certification code, theme color and background color. These, I kind of wanted to point them out because there are some storefronts that are, what they're doing is they're using these colors to try to create a more branded install experience. So they might be used, let's say, in a scenario similar to a storefront, and the related applications. Now, there's the concept that, you know, some of these members are considered supplementary, and this means that if we take a look at things like description, the rating, the screenshots, they're really not needed by the user agent at runtime. These fields will not change the behavior or how the application looks when it's running. So even though they are not crucial and they are optional, they do provide useful information in the very specific case of storefronts. So fields as categories, which can describe which application categories the web app belongs to. Fields like description, which allows the developer to describe the purpose of the web application. The rating, which is the certification ID for the web application, and screenshots, which depict common use scenarios of the web application. So At the moment, these members definitions have been moved to a new document node that serves as a registry of supplementary members for the web app manifest. And this web app manifest app info is where the new definition for some of these members have been moved. The way that a manifest would look and these supplementary members is depicted here in this slide, where you can see name of the application, and then the ones that are supplementary ones, categories, description, the rating, and the screenshots per se. So again, this note is kind of like a new document that will be a registry for supplementary members of the web app manifest that will provide additional metadata that's relevant when we're talking about cases like the ones depicted here, which are basically desktop stores, mobile stores, or some other type of acquisition UX that could be browser-based, like web components, for example, the one that is distributed through a PWA builder, that take fields from the manifest and try to create this install experience that would be close to what the user would expect from, let's say, a native application. So what more do we need to enhance web applications in the store, and what more can we do regarding the manifest file? There are a couple of proposals in the MS Edge explainers that can be relevant to this effort at hand. The first enhancement and idea is the addition of a changelog key. And it's pretty simple. It would pretty much enable developers to display their PWA's changelog in a standardized fashion, and it would enable users to access a PWA changelog relatively easy. So if we wanted to see how this would, let's say, look more or less, here's an example from an application that was downloaded from a store, where you can see the version history and the details of the update from the current versions. So the way that the changelog would work is by pretty much adding, let's say, this snippet of code to a manifest file that would have information on the version and the history, and a link to the history of all the previous changelogs. So that's one idea on how we can enhance manifest files in order to cater to a more storefront type of experience. Another idea would be the request on install, and here this is a field that's not directly related with a store, but knowing the information that you are trying to request can be useful, because then you would be able to put in the permission sections, in the permission section of the listing, what will the application have access to. So coming from the explainer, it says that it pretty much establishes a mechanism by which developers can declare the sensitive APIs or the enhanced permissions that they would need in order to prompt users for these permissions. And I'm putting here during install in red, because even though that's what the idea of this key in the manifest file will be used for, it's worth noting that we can also use it to pretty much announce to the user that the web application will have access to certain APIs. And this is an example of how it looks if we were using this during the install, but then again, it would be integrated. It would be something that would say permissions. This application would require permission to your microphone, to your camera, and let's say other permissions that you would request. This is how a snippet of code that would go on the manifest file would look based on the request on install. So as an example, we could request a camera, microphone, notifications, etc., and this can be reflected on the App Store listing of the web application. So having presented an idea of what we are trying to achieve here, I have a list of open questions, and here I would like to open the microphone to the audience, specifically to not only discuss some of the ideas that you've seen, but also some of the questions that I'm going to present on screen, and to have a discussion where we can hopefully come up with more things that would help level the playing field for web applications. So things like language support, things like region support. Would it make sense, for example, if you have a web application, to be able to say, you know, we have things like Argos, we have things that are very specific to the UK only. Maybe I might have a field in the manifest file that would allow me to lock the distribution of this of the application once it's ingested in an app store. What about the need to refer to in-app purchases? Would this be useful? Would it not be useful? And have you seen any use case in a web application that you might be developing? Developer information, I think this is pretty much one that needs to be there, not only because it's a convenient way to have access to how to contact and how to get support, but also because it can be something that might help for verifying that the application that we are installing comes from the person, the entity, or the company that is publishing it. I talked about the featured graphic or featured video in the application listing. It's something that's not yet in a manifest file. Do you think it would make sense? Would you see it to be useful? Also, what type of media do you think would make sense? Would you rather have it to be just an image, or would you rather to be open to videos as well? Possibly one of the more complicated questions that I think we have is, how can we verify the publisher when it comes to the information that you're inputting in a manifest file? A reference to license or usage permissions of the assets that are in the manifest file. This can be a requirement depending on the application store, on having to grant them permission and sign a license agreement to allow them to use the assets that are in the file. Is this something that we can solve by putting a field in the manifest file? And in general, if there are any other information that might be missing. So I would like to open here. Now, I do not see the browser, so I'm just gonna stop sharing at the moment, and then we can start the conversation. I believe we have around 5 to 10 minutes left.
Daniel, do you want to go ahead?
Hey, my name's Daniel. I work on Chromium for the web platform team. And I just wanted to pipe in briefly to talk about the important thing called what we do for manifest unique identifier. I hope if the folks on the call are interested in this, I hope this is a good audience for me to raise our future change / spec solidification as the manifest identifier. You can imagine that the store might want to update its info when the publisher wants to then say update its metadata, maybe add a screenshot. And there isn't a spec documented way for us to know that, hey, this manifest I just saw corresponds to that app that you saw before. Right now, it's different on different browsers. Mostly it uses the start URL as the identifier. Android, I think, uses the manifest URL, which is the URL it's hosted at. And that is the direction that we're going to go towards based on the TPAC discussions. So just so you know, the way that manifests, the way that this data is going to be updated, the way that the browser knows that a manifest will update a new older manifest that it has on file, or if it's going to be a new app, will be based on the manifest URL by default, and then we're hoping to also add a field to override that. It'll be the ID. That ID will be combined with the origin, so it'll be origin plus ID, and that ID's default is going to be the manifest URL. So I just wanted to let everybody know that here, because this is an important thing that isn't the case now, and it's something that's easy to like forget or not think about, and it kind of bites people later because they don't realize that, hey, their app isn't updating and there's actually 2 apps now. Anyways, back to you guys.
Yeah, I think that becomes really important when you've got multiple browsers that can install PWAs on the same box, basically, so that you don't have those collisions where you've got one that's installed by Chrome, one from Edge, et cetera, et cetera.
Any other ideas on some of the fields that might be useful on the manifest?
Tom had asked about support for payment request, and I don't know, Tom, do you want to kind of extrapolate on that a little bit? Or maybe not. Seems like that might be the sort of thing that could be, if we were to maybe change up, if I'm understanding the question properly, like being able to indicate that an app would use payment request API, that could possibly be enumerated as part of what's currently the request on install, but might get jiggered as like permissions or something like that, or capabilities. Yeah, Riley, did you have?
Yeah, I think there's been some discussion on the idea of install time permissions, and I think the lesson that we learned from Chrome apps, which we'd like to avoid making again in PWAs, is that actually granting install time permissions is not very user friendly. It tends to mean granting permissions for things that the user doesn't really understand why they're being asked for. So definitely re-specifying like install time as more of like a high watermark, saying like this is, if the app opts into this, it can say, okay, I will never request more than this permission. And that can be used by stores as well to kind of give that indicator of like, this could use in-app payments, this could use geolocation, this could use camera. And allowing that kind of enforcement at the browser level, but not forcing the user to make a decision up front.
Yeah, I totally hear where you're coming from on that. And the spec actually, or the explainer that we've written on it, specifically says that this is in no way an auto block grant of those permissions. I think one of the challenges that the Android approach was it was an all or nothing approach. So if you enumerated any permission in there, the user had to accept it or they couldn't install the app. So we very much don't want to go down that path. We think still giving users the option of choosing which permissions they want to accept and which ones they don't want to accept is good. And we've gone the path of like, these are we would like to see developers enumerate the most important features of their PWA. So if you are, Google Meet, it should be your camera and microphone, right? If your Teams, same thing, those sorts of things. And then like the same process will still exist for using the permissions API to request additional permissions, but we weren't planning on doing the like blocking out anything that's not in the manifest, for the sole reason that there's currently not a good means of managing that in the browser because the manifest is downloaded so late in the process. So we wouldn't be able to, throw up blockades to certain APIs. It just seems like a non-trivial thing to solve. So that's specifically why we decided not to go down that route, and instead had it as a way of informing users that these were some of the permissions that the developer is going to ask for or can ask for during kind of that either install time or first run experience. As we're prototyping it, we're actually looking at it as when the browser reparents the PWA to its own window. At that point, it would ask for the permissions, and it will ask for permission or re-enumerate permissions that a user may have already granted, and so they can kind of see what the permissions are that they've already done. So camera, microphone, it would just already say like, you've granted that if you've already done it, but you would at least be able to see kind of all together, these are the things that this API or this app is going to ask for.
Okay, that's good to know. It was unclear from the presentation whether it was what what the plan was. Mm-hmm. I know because it looked like a normal permission prompt.
Yeah, so that was just showing that there are
clarify.
Yeah, there are some existing batch permissions prompts, and that was the screenshot that Diego had grabbed. If you take a look at the explainer, which I linked to in the chat, there are a couple, I think there's one kind of visual of what that could potentially look like in terms of the picker. And we're actually in the process of running some user research between now and the end of the year to validate this idea with users. But so far, the feedback has been positive, as long as they maintain control over it, as opposed to having auto grants.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess the idea there is that it could be something that can be used by a storefront like UX to specify that the application would eventually use certain permissions, not that it would grant them. And yeah, the bit of UX is pretty much from how it would look for what it was intended, which is the install time permission prompt. Okay. Do you have any other comments or? Okay, I see here, Alexei, why do we need app stores if we have search engines? Search engines can be stores for PWAs. I think in this specific scenario, what we're trying to do is pretty much just tap onto the application stores because it's a quite known and common paradigm where people go and look for applications. I don't think one thing negates the other. So yeah, I mean, it'd be great to see PWAs through other distribution methods, but specifically in this case, it would be how can we use the fields or enhance the manifest in order to cater to application stores. Yeah, and also there are in the catalogs, as are in types like AppScope and some other that are out there.
I think it's also important that the users at this point expect to find applications in stores, and so
yeah,
this is meeting users where they are and meeting that expectation of finding them. I agree that, like, you know, it's the web, it should be organic, but this is where users are looking for things, and so we should come up with ways of allowing users to find stuff where they expect it to be.
Any other comment or suggestion, idea? I'm not sure if we've run out of time.
Yeah, PJ mentioned the in-app ads or in-app payments. Yeah, I think those are good ones as well. And I want to say that those might be captured in some of the app info issues. We're trying to track as many of these enhancements in there as possible. So if you want to add some additional pieces there, I've got the link. I think it was from 1147. Feel free to add more enhancement ideas there.
So,
and Mike, you had a question about the ratings and reviews. Watch this space. We have something, Diego and I have something forthcoming that I hope will be out maybe this week even.
So I have a concern, just like a general concern, and this kind of like follows on from the permission stuff, but it also applies to things like version history and things like ads and in-app payments, where if I'm concerned about the sort of the user expectation breaking nature of not making things that are declared in the manifest, like not having things that are like required to be declared in the manifest if they're going to be used. You know, if, you know, and, you know, maybe this had, you know, maybe this also might apply to things like App Store policies. Like, I think the reasons why app stores say like this app contains ads or this app contains in-app payments is because there's a rule in the App Store that if you have those things, you need to declare that up front. And so I'm kind of like, it does seem like there's a user expectation problem of, you know, if an app didn't say that it needed in-app payments, but it did, but it used it, or it said it didn't have ads, but it does, Is that something you'd imagine happening at the store level, that like store review processes would catch that? Or is it kind of okay that those kinds of expectations can be broken?
Do you want to take this, Diego, or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. I feel like this is the sort of thing that will come down to the UX of what the installation prompt looks like the first run experience in the browser. And I think if we can manage users' expectations about, how these permissions requests are being handled, and kind of not basically not hurt the user experience like you're talking about. So, I think this is where the user testing comes in. Making sure that people won't be thrown off if another permission gets requested later on. But as we're approaching kind of that permission enumeration, we want to capture kind of all of the key task related permissions, so that it's really kind of like a one-off thing that maybe if you're going to, I don't know, to a particular, like Twitter, for example, you don't need to give location, but it's kind of if you want to include that information, you can choose to include that information. And then it's kind of up to the developer to provide the right context for when they're asking for permissions, like they should be doing now, but let's face it, most aren't. So yeah, I don't know if that's particularly helpful, but I think we need to do some user research and make sure that the UI is appropriately addressing the fact that there may be additional permissions that are requested after the fact.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what the user, just to see how users actually react to it. I know one anecdote that recently came up, it kind of applies to version history, is an enterprise admin asked if they could pin a PWA at a version, because they're used to being able to install native apps and pin them at a version through sort of their own enterprise, in rollout controls. And the problem is the web doesn't work that way, right? You always get the latest version of the app from the server. And the introduction of version history and kind of pretending that web apps have versions, I would be concerned that would again kind of create this confusion of, well, actually web apps don't really have versions. You can be updated whenever they want to be. And it is nice for sites to be able to say, yeah, here are the new things. But if the browser or the store is highlighting this concept of versions that doesn't really exist, that might turn out to be kind of confusing and weird.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I know for a lot of the folks that we've talked to about the version history and have kind of been asking for some sort of changelog exposure, it was a lot about being able to alert users to new features that they're rolling out that may not be self-evident. So just kind of letting folks know that things are up to date. Any other questions?
I am wondering, back to the permissions. So this sounds like a good user experience, to have sort of permissions presented up front, but not required, that I accept them all immediately. I'm wondering, will developers actually use that a lot, though? What's kind of the incentive for them to declare permissions upfront rather than get a user to install your app and sort of delay the permissions until they're actually required?
Yeah, so I think we know from apps that we've worked with in the past that there have been crucial permissions that have been requested using the traditional request flow, and users have developed a blindness to permissions requests, especially because of notifications being so abusive. So there's kind of this knee-jerk reaction of just hitting the no, just decline. And so some of the applications that we've talked to were like, hey, we've got people who are trying to start a video call, for instance, and they haven't granted either their camera or their microphone, and they're sending us complaints because they're saying the software doesn't work when it's actually the permission that they denied us, and we can't ask again. So now we're in a situation where we have to, somehow inform the user where in their browser to go to turn the permission back on. And so they ended up kind of in that position where it was a poor user experience because of just kind of the way we've been habitually trained to deny permissions requests. So this sort of giving you a new opportunity to present, hey, here are the permissions that we would like to be able to have, and you still have the option of choosing to accept or deny each individual one, and bringing in what you've said before that we are hoping will help to address that and have lead to less user issues and complaints about software not working the way that it should. So for developers that are running into that, this would be I would think a great boon to them, because it's sort of a second opportunity to request something, even though it's not really a second opportunity to request something, if that makes sense. Like it's not the same permissions request as before. I'm going to grab a picture of the screenshot that we have in that other doc too. I can show that. If I can I drop pictures in chat? Let's see. Oh, that did not work. I can add an attachment, maybe. Nope. All right, I don't know how to do that, but if you follow the link to the install time permissions, which was the third link in the chat, you'll see it in there about most of the way, like 2/3 of the way down under the example.
Cool, thanks.
I think those are the relevant links that we presented. So first, the first two are manifest and manifest app info, and the other ones are the specific version history, the changelog, and the install time permission prompt. I need a shortener next time.
There was another question from Alexi about restricting some web APIs like WebUSB to only installed PWAs. I know this is kind of a larger discussion that I think was first started maybe 2 BlinkOns ago. The gauntlet cast down was we don't want to limit new APIs to only being for the installed context. But I think sort of the nuance to that is certain APIs may have a slightly different shape based on whether you're installed. So I think Riley can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, in the file permissions, for instance, the file system access, that the in-browser grant is a much shorter time period than if you were installed. It might be a persistent grant as opposed to automatic reset at the end of the session or something like that.
I think that, unfortunately, Marian already left, and he would know the answer. I think that was definitely thrown out as an idea. I'm not sure that's actually what we have implemented at the moment. I don't think we have persistence at all right now. But that is the kind of difference that we're thinking about. We think that it's dangerous to provide too much of an incentive to push users to install for permission's sake. And so we don't want to make it we don't mean to make installation a gateway for granting access to permissions, but we can change behavior in those kinds of more subtle ways based on installation state.
Yeah, that's kind of our perspective as well. I think the other area that we've looked at potentially switching things up for installed versus not is maybe expanding the storage limits for an installed PWA as opposed to an in-tab PWA.
Yeah, I think that the general intuition there was that an installed PWA is one the user may have a longer term relationship with. And so things like permissions persistence, storage quotas, those kinds of things that might be more important to a user who's going to be using the app repeatedly over a long period of time would be the kinds of things that we would loosen up with installation.
Okay, no more raised hands. Great. Well, anything that feel free to get involved, and anything we can help you with, then just let us know, ping us, and we're happy to continue the discussion.